But we're thrilled that you're with us. As many of you know, Sandy Darity is the Samuel Du Bois Cook Professor of Public Policy, first, African American Studies, second, and Economics at Duke University, where he also directs the Samuel Du Bois Center on Social Equity at Duke University. Chair of the Department of African and African American Studies.
Well, not now.
And the founding director, pardon me?
Not now.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Was the chair, okay.
Yeah.
And the founding director of the Research Network on Racial and Ethnic Inequality at Duke. Many other things as well. One thing that I did note, though, is he is also the director of the undergraduate honors program in economics. And the part that surprised me most, director of graduate studies at the University of North Carolina. So let's stay on the Bill Emmons paper for just another minute. You know, we all appreciate the comments. We hope that that framing is helpful. Of course, with the structural framing, there's a lot we don't understand. Mm-hmm. But my guess is that you might be more inclined to think that the structural causes are probably more driving some of these inequalities than, say, the behavioral model. So if that's correct, Sandy, then, you know, what is the role for choice and human agency and executive function in these terms? I mean, financial capability. You know, Angelique's comments yesterday, I think, were suggesting that there's still a really important agenda for that work. So if these families are facing these structural barriers, and in our own research, we're discerning greater headwinds among minority, young, and less educated families, you know, how do we think about the proper role and even strengthen the ability of financial capability to move families forward?
So I think that a key distinction for our conversation over these 2 days is between those factors that affect differences across individuals in the generation of wealth and those factors that dictate differences across social groups in wealth. And so I would submit that behavioral differences may be a partial explanation for the former. Mm-hmm. That is, individual variations. So if we were to look within a group, like if we looked within the Black community or we looked within the Latino community, we might find that there are behavioral differences which are influencing who has a better wealth position and who doesn't. I'm not going to say it's determining, but it is affecting it. Okay. But if we look at differences across the groups, behavioral factors don't come into play. And I would argue they don't come into play at all. Because in principle, what you would have to be arguing is that the group with the worst outcomes on average is inclined towards greater dysfunctional behaviors. Bad choices, ignorance, bad judgments, weaker motivation. I mean, the ultimate implication of this kind of argument is that there's something inferior about the group that has worse outcomes. Now, I would argue that there are not proportionately more Black fools than there are white fools, okay? Both groups have fools. Some days I'm a fool, but I don't think that the distribution of fools is any different across the two groups.
Pretty widespread.
Right. So insofar as that's the case, then we can't really make a satisfactory argument that differences in behavior across the groups explains differences in wealth outcomes. And in fact, you know, there's some evidence that we've talked about over the course of the past day and a half that I think is consistent with what I've just said. So for example, if you control for household income, we find no significant difference in Black and white savings rates, and in some income categories, the Black savings rate is slightly higher. We don't find any evidence of any significant difference in rates of return on portfolios after you control for household income. So if you control for household income, Blacks actually get more years of schooling than whites and more credentials. And one of my takeaways from Corey's talk earlier today was that in some sense Blacks actually overachieve educationally relative to whites, and so again, you know, this would not suggest at all that there's some greater dysfunction that's occurring in the Black community relative to the white community. And one last point in this context, we frequently talk about money management problems or people who make bad financial decisions. And I would suggest that maybe actually lower income people are better money managers than higher income people, simply because they have to be. And individuals who actually have relatively high levels of financial literacy can mismanage. For example, I'm thinking about the victims of Bernie Madoff's Ponzi scheme. I would hardly think that anyone would say that those are folks who were financially illiterate. Okay? And in fact, you might even argue that they would be more susceptible to fraud because of their confidence in their own capacity to manage their portfolios. So I think we really have to think carefully about the resource conditions that individuals and families are faced with, and those resource conditions, the distribution of those resource conditions is really, in my view, decisive in shaping the distribution of wealth.
Interesting.
Yeah.